Welcome everybody to this event, which is the launch of the new journal, Africa Bibliography, Research and Documentation from SCOLMA and the International African Institute. We're very pleased to see you all, both the audience here in person in SOAS this evening and to our online audience, which is joining us from many parts of the world. We're grateful to our colleagues at Cambridge University Press who've published the new journal, which is a merger of SCOLMA's Africa Research and Documentation and the IAI's Africa Bibliography, both of which have been going for several decades, now merged into this publication about research, libraries, archives, and publications in African studies. Our editor of the journal, Terry Barringer, will say a little bit more about it a little later in the evening. But meanwhile, we would very much encourage you to submit articles for it if you have something suitable you would like published, and to subscribe to the journal either via Cambridge University Press or by becoming a member of SCOLMA, which will give you a subsidised rate for the journal. And there are details on our website. The subject of African language publishing features in the first issue, and we are very pleased to have two speakers joining us tonight to discuss this important subject. First of all, I'd like to introduce Munyao Kilolo, who is a Kenyan writer and translator who founded Ituika, a literary platform devoted to African languages and translations, and is also projects officer at the Ngugi wa Thiong'o Foundation. He is currently a PhD student at the University of California, Irvine, from where he joins us online. Welcome, Munyao, and thank you for joining us. I would also like to introduce Dr. Ida Hadjivayanis, who is Senior Lecturer in Swahili Studies in the African Languages, Cultures and Literatures section here at SOAS. And Ida has recently translated Nobel Prize winner Abdul Razak Gurna's 1994 novel Paradise into Swahili, and it is very hot off the press and I believe available from the African Books Collective now, and it's got a beautiful, beautiful cover. So do go and buy that. This event is being recorded so that we can make it available afterwards for people who haven't been able to attend now. So details will be on the SCOLMA website. And at the end of the conversation between Munyao and Ida, we will take some questions from the inline audience, from the in-person audience, and also if you're online, do write questions in the chat, and we will monitor that. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. It's good to have you all here, and hello everybody online. So Munyao, karibu sana. I will start with.
Asante.
I will start with the first question right away, if that's okay. So I think you've been very inspirational, isn't it, in promoting inter-African languages translation. So for instance, Gikuyu into Swahili, Swahili into and you also led the Jalada translation project, where translations are taken into and between African languages. And I think you did this through maybe networking, social media, sort of like print and digital publication, etc. Just tell us a bit more, or rather a lot more about this, about Jalada Press and the process and everything.
Thank you so much, and I'm happy to be here. So the Jalada project, the translation project, which we aimed to have one short story translated into as many languages as possible, started earlier in 2015 when we published an anthology of short stories in different languages, especially African languages. And at that time, I felt like when we published that, I was just looking around on the internet to try and see what else is being done in terms of engaging African languages in publication. And there wasn't really much that was being done at that time, especially on online literary platforms. And then I just interested my colleagues in thinking about what we could do to have more work done between African languages themselves, and what are the mechanisms that we could develop to be able to have, short stories appearing and being read across the continent in different languages. So we conceptualized the Gelada Translation Project with the aim of having one short story translated into many different languages. And one of the reasons for that is because we wanted to bring the community of translators and writers in African languages in conversation, and to have their languages also come into conversation. And because there wasn't much that was established at that time in terms of the mechanisms and the ways in which people had been working together to promote African languages, we depended so much on our own networks. And thankfully, social media has done so many wonderful things in connecting us. So I could easily have a conversation with someone from DR Congo, or I could have a conversation with someone from, Eritrea or South Africa. And, in the initial year, I reached out to so many people, and we had conversations about them participating together in this project, which would bring so many people working individually in their own spaces and in their own languages to come together in a collective project that would give meaning and that would increase the visibility of the work that's being done across the continent in different languages. And since then, we've had this one short story now translated into 100 languages from across the world. And many people continue to be inspired by this work. And, we are seeing a lot more being done. One, by the people who participated in the project, and also by others who have seen this as an example of what is possible in translating between different languages.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Can I just quickly ask you, this story, is it a story, I think I heard it, is it a story by Ngugi wa Thiong'o that was never seen before? Or, what was the story?
Yes. So the story is originally written in Gikuyu, and Gikuyu is a Kenyan language, one of the most widely spoken languages in Kenya. And so we wanted that story to not only be read in Gikuyu as the original language, but also to be read in other African languages. So, of course, we reached out to Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o because, as we all know, he's been a very vocal advocate of African languages for a very long time. And it was only, important that we engage him in this kind of project. And so he gave us one of the short stories that he had not published before. He tells us the story of how, he really tried to write a short story for us, but because we had not given him much time, he had to find a story that he had written before and share that to us. It was only in Gikuyu when he shared it with us, but I requested him to translate that into English because, and I hope we can also talk about this, to translate between one African language and the other, there's the sense and the importance of having, bridges between them, because we haven't yet established, the ways in which we can easily translate between the two languages. So I asked him to translate that into English, and he was able to do that in a month or two. And when that was sent, we started now to have this story travel between, from Kikuyu to many other languages, around the world. So the story itself is called Ituika Murugaru, and that it's translated into the Upright Revolution. The complete title of it is The Upright Revolution, or Why Humans Walk Upright, and it's available online on the Gelada Africa website in all its various languages. And it's not just published online, it has also been published widely in print In India, it was published in English. In Sweden, it was published in Swedish. In Spain, I think it was published in 5 different languages that are spoken in Spain. But also, it was published in Kenya, in Ekegusi. It's also published in West Africa, in various languages there, in print as well. So it exists both online and in print.
I really like the idea of English as the bridge language. And I think this is not given enough sort of like space, especially now. So for instance, how can I speak to a Soto? I probably need English as a bridge language. I completely agree with you. We had a conference here, a workshop 3 weeks ago, and we had a call for translators, sort of like sending the abstracts and translate a Swahili work into English and other languages. We were hoping we would get sort of like some African languages as well. So for instance, maybe Swahili to Sotho or to Gikuyu, etc. But we didn't. We only had English, and I think there were 2 French, 1 Arabic, but we did not. We had about 70 plus sort of like interest, but it was very difficult without the bridge of English. So now just thinking and focusing on the publishing that you mentioned, there's a lot of publishing happening now in African languages. And of course, there are also many, many challenges. And I think you speak about this in your own articles, that there is the underdevelopment of publishing infrastructure, and there's financial constraints. Can you just tell us a bit more about the challenges that maybe you had, or that you also see around you in terms of publishing in African languages?
I think most of the challenges we face are tied into publishing, literary consumption, and as well as government policies. And while we might not have control over so many things, I think there are things that we can be able to do in order to meet these challenges. To begin with, so for many years, a lot of the publishing that happens, for example, in Kenya, is geared towards publishing for schools, because that's where there's a market. And because not much of the work that is being read in schools is in African languages, therefore many publishers do not feel that there is a need to do that kind of publishing. And also when they are thinking about the business side of publishing. When you publish, for example, a novel in an African language, already publishing is a challenge, whether you're publishing in English or in Kiswahili or any other language. But when you publish in an African language, then you're also facing a much steeper challenge in terms of encouraging people to be able to buy and read in those languages. So we are dealing with an historical problem where these languages have not been given any importance for a long time. And therefore, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to undo that kind of injustice that has happened for a very long time. And I think one of these challenges, one of the ways we can address this challenge is to increase the amount of material that is available in African languages, and that is to publish either way, whether or not there's any hope of making any financial sense out of it. We need to be able to do a lot more in terms of publishing, and because it's not easy, a lot of support needs to be given towards publishers, right, in order for them to produce these materials in a way that is sustainable for them. But also, again, it is encouraging, people to read more in these languages, and then for governments to also, allow children in our schools to read in, the different languages. I think last year we saw one of the publishers in East Africa I think it's East Africa Educational Publishers. They put out a lot of materials for children in more than 8 different Kenyan languages. And I thought that that was a very important step towards, orienting children as they start school to be able to learn and be comfortable with reading material that's in, different African languages. And if we can consistently grow that culture of reading material in our languages, then publishing can also be motivated to do more work in ensuring that those materials are available. And we cannot just publish only for children. We need to publish material that is, that can be read across, by all audiences, so that we continue to increase the amount of work that's available and continue to encourage people to engage with this material. And when we do that, it is possible that we are going to be able to overcome the, long-standing challenge of having material available for people to read. And then also, for those of us who are able to, in any way, speak to governments or influence government processes, it is, it's up to us to encourage those in power or to reach out to them so that the policies that are put in place are not just policies, but they are things that can be executed, right? That they can be, put into action. Because there's a lot of things that have been written recently about how we are encouraging, writing, publishing, reading in African languages. But when you go to the ground and see what's happening, there's not much support that's being given towards that process. So it should go beyond just the policy and to actually ensuring that there's a follow-up of what is being or of what is supposed to be done.
Yeah. So I think what you just said now sort of makes me think of your article on the website, and I think you sort of talk about Tuelo Gabonewe, who wrote sort of two novels. Who is South African, but he wrote 2 novels in Setswana, and so you call his move what is it? Sorry, a bold statement. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the bold statement? And then, so something else I would add is that I never heard about sort of I see myself as somebody at SOAS where a lot of Africa-related things are happening, but I don't hear about most of these initiatives. What are these bold statements? Why? What's happening? Why are we not on social media enough? Or tell me a little bit more about these bold statements that we don't get to hear.
I think one of the things I learned with the Jalada Translation Project is that there are so many people who are doing work in African languages, who are, writing and trying to publish work in African languages. But the visibility is not really there for them. And there are, of course, many reasons why that is. Starting, of course, with the fact that there's a lot of attention and a lot of investment that is given to English, European languages, and the lingua francas in each of the regions. Like in Kenya and East Africa, generally, we have a lot of people who write in Kiswahili or in English, given a lot of focus in whether it's in interviews or it's in reviews and all those things. They get to have their works talked about, in spaces that are visible to a lot of people. But when you write a book in Akegusi, for instance, or you write a book in Kikamba, for instance, there's not many people who are, speaking about that work. And the way that you get to know about something is when whoever has like on the internet, people get to talk about each other's works, right? So one of the reasons why I was able to know who's doing what is because I was very keen on talking to people and asking them, do you know someone writing in Lingala? Do you know someone doing that? And because these efforts are so wide apart, and because if I don't read in Lingala, I will ordinarily not be on the internet looking, for a Lingala text all the time. One of the ways in which we have tried to increase visibility is to have platforms that bring people working in different African languages in conversation. Like if you look at the Jalada website where we published all these works, then you're able to see all these names of people who are writing or translating in very many different languages. And I'm actually very happy because Tuelo, who you've just mentioned, was one of the founding members of Jalada, and he's gone on to to do work in an African language that has become very recognizable. So we want to increase the visibility of these writers by spotlighting them in every platform that we have. But we also want to encourage each other to speak and write about the works that are being done in these languages, and also to ask people to translate this work into other languages so that access is increased and we are able to have people read and review these works, for greater visibility. So while we are doing all these things to increase visibility, I think I mentioned earlier, it's very essential for, especially in schools, to have students begin to read these works, because one of the ways I used to know about interesting books when I was in school is another student would come and tell me, I've read this Pace Setter. It's just a beautiful story, and then I would be so curious to go and read that work. So if we are assigning students works, then there's a way in which more children can be able to talk about these works, and it spreads, and people will grow up again knowing about what is being done and what is being published and what is being written or translated in an African language.
Okay, that's really good. Let me just quickly ask you, you've mentioned Swahili. I see Swahili very much as well as Soyinka does, as a Pan-African language, as a language that you talk about bridging languages. I see it as a bridging language in Africa. Do you see that as well, or what are your thoughts about Swahili?
I would say I see Swahili as a very important language in how other languages across Africa relate. First, we have, it is the most spoken, language in Africa if you don't speak about Arabic and all that. But Swahili is spoken in so many countries and by so many people. And even though it's different in each of the regions, it gives us a very important opportunity in terms of how we can have an increased conversation between the different African languages. And this thought actually emerges also from the Jalada translation project, where we had to use English and French and Arabic as bridge languages between the other languages. And I see as Swahili grows to become the Pan-African language, the language of transcontinental use. I think of it more as a language that can, become the bridge between all these other African languages. Because if we have so many people able to, become good at this language, and they want to translate between, say, Gikuyu and Kamba, or Luo and Chitsoga, for instance, and they both know Swahili, then we do not have to depend on European languages to be able to bridge between these African languages. And having an African language become, take the place that has traditionally been, given to European languages, then that makes it encourages more, even the lingua francas in the different regions, to also take up the same space. So while it's not only Kiswahili that can become a bridge language, we can have, for example, Hausa in West Africa become a bridge language between the very many languages that are spoken in West Africa. And there are several other languages that can take up that kind of space. But I think Kiswahili, because of the place that it stands now and the way it's expanding, right? We've seen recently that in South Africa, they've introduced Kiswahili in schools. And we are also seeing, many organizations, the UN, for instance, just declared a national day for Kiswahili. So these steps are very important in creating this kind of Kiswahili to become, the language that glues or helps conversation with all the other African languages.
I think I completely agree with you. And in your article, you talk of the colonial linguistic culture. So maybe Kiswahili might be the language that takes us away from that. So, I'm aware of time. I think we've already used our half an hour. But the last question, just thinking of philanthropic sort of like venture that maybe can help the book in Africa. I was talking to for Peponi. His name is Goya, and he told me, one of the ways that this sort of like can be, the book I translated can be read is by finding, for instance, organization or people who can buy, say, like 1,000 copies, and these are distributed to schools and libraries across the region, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts about this? Are we still then sort of like depending on aid in a certain way, or is it like, how do you view this?
I think African philanthropy must, be one of the answers to this challenge. And I would just give an example of what we've been doing with the Kiswahili Prize, which is primarily supported by the Safar Group, an organization that's based in Africa and operates across, 14 countries on the continent. And they have committed support for the last 7 years and are likely going to be supporting this prize for many years from now. And in the conversations we've been having with them and other people within the continent is also not only to support the prizes and award individual writers and make their works available, but also in assistance to ensuring that the works that have been published are distributed widely. So last year, we had an agreement with them that because there are already books that we've published as a result of the winning manuscripts from the work, and these are published by Mkuki na Nyota, that they would sponsor a number of copies to be distributed across schools and libraries in the region. And as an Africa-based organization, they committed to purchasing 4,000 books of the published winning books to be distributed and given to students and to many people who can read these works. And I think if this was not done, then the way we know how books sell in East Africa, for instance, or in other regions of the continent, is that we don't get many people purchasing books if they're not related to schools. So getting an organization commit to purchasing 4,000 copies of a book, that is a massive contribution towards the work of the writers and the work of the publishers and also the work of the booksellers. So what that means is that the production chain of books is given a boost that is so important in ensuring that African languages find the same kind of space and the same kind of impact that other languages, like especially English, are having. I find a lot of people who read in Kenya, in Nairobi, and most of what they read is in English. And one of the basic reasons is, of course, we have the historical issues that we've talked about in terms of languages, but one of the most basic reasons why they read in English is because these materials are widely available and they do not have to spend way too much money to get a novel in English compared to the challenges of getting, a book published in a local language, for instance. So the more available materials, and if, people who have the means are able to support production, then it helps with so many of the challenges that we've already identified, and we can, make many strides towards the right direction.
Okay, thank you very much. This was excellent. Thank you so much. I'll pass on to Lucy, who might want to engage with the audience.
Yes, thank you very much, both of you. Yeah, that was fascinating.
Thank you.
So are there any questions from the audience here? Do we have any on the chat? No.
Anybody want to buy 1,000 copies?
No, I don't want to buy 1,000 copies. But I did have a question. So it's interesting that the text itself was from Ngugi, and Ngugi is one of the forefathers in that sense who talked about how we need to decolonize, or how Africans need to decolonize their minds, and we need to go beyond European languages to look at our own languages in a sense. But then my question is, how does using a bridging language, especially a European language, alter the text in that way then with translating?
I think Mariam is questioning sort of like the whole idea of okay, do you see English as a global language, or do you see it as an imperial language? Sort of, I think that's what she's asking.
And how it affects the translation as well.
Translations.
Yes.
We started writing in Kikuyu, and he also has the switch from writing in English to writing in Kikuyu. So now I wonder how then that influences the text in a sense of we're bringing it back from Kikuyu to English to other languages then.
A lot is always lost in translation, regardless of what language is used. But when we speak of English as a bridging language, we are looking at, the commonality that exists between, the people who want to use these different languages. So we had a lot of challenges with a number of the translations where the problem was not really the English, but the problem was, the things that exist in a certain culture that do not exist in another. And how did they travel between the original language to English, and sometimes to French, and then to the other language, right? So it was a bit difficult for some people, especially who do not have certain names or animals in their region, and therefore they couldn't, find ways to articulate that in their languages, or when Ngugi is writing songs in Kikuyu that are not easily translatable into either English or other languages. So what do you do with that? So in a sense, I feel by the time the story is a struggle between Kikuyu to English and the other language, there is something that's lost. But the problem is we almost do not have a way for that story to travel from Kikuyu to this other language without the bridge, right? If I only know of maybe 3 languages that did not require a bridge. So, for example, in Kenya, there are 2 very similar languages, that's Kikuyu and Kimeru, right? That did not require a bridge, and they have they are very similar languages. So you would also ask yourself, was anything lost in that translation? So it is for the writers and translators to share their experiences and see what happens within the process of translation. But I think as a European language, also English may not necessarily be able to express what an African language expresses in its entirety. So there are things that will definitely, be lost in that process of translation. But we do know that until we have developed other bridge languages within the continent, some of these European languages will continue to be, the bridge languages. But the essence of creating this translation projects is so that we encourage more and more work towards having conversations between African languages possible even without European languages.
Maybe I can also quickly add, I know like we talk of loss, yes, but there's also gain in translation. There's always loss and gain. You probably lost something, but then you might have gained something else because the original work was in an African language, in an African reality, African context of Kenya. So when you're translating that from English into maybe, I don't know, Gikamba, there should be some gain possibly that might have, that was a loss in English. I assume, I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So we have one from somebody in Somaliland who says, hello everyone, I followed the work by Janada and was always pioneering work, very happy to know about this new initiative. It is good news for this new publication, but we're always challenged not only in terms of production when it comes to African languages publications, but also of circulation. So while in Hargeisa in Somaliland, it's easy to buy a book from London or Berlin, a bit as you were saying, Munyao, lots of perhaps English books, rather than getting a book that's been published in Nairobi, which is so close by. So are there any thoughts on how to overcome the challenge of books circulating within the continent? Did you hear that, Munyao?
Yeah.
Circulation.
Yeah, so we have, like he's rightly said, there's a lot of, books coming from the West and made available in bookstores across the continent. But it becomes a major challenge. Even getting a text from Tanzania to Kenya is usually a problem. And part of that is with, our taxation laws, for instance. Right, that make it that if you acquire a text from your neighboring country, there's, by the time it gets to your country, then there's an increase in price that makes it not very viable to get those materials from there. But also the publishers themselves, we need to develop distribution mechanisms and agreements between publishers and book distributors that allows them to, to have, this network of people that can easily distribute the books. For example, in Kenya, we have a certain, book distributor called Ekaya Arts Initiative. And for a while, they have been working with Mkuki na Nyota to make books available in Mombasa. Right. So if we have those kinds of connections between publishers in different countries with distributors in different towns across the continent, then it becomes even more possible for people to have access to these works. Maybe in the future, we can develop the capacity to be able to also print locally what is being published in other spaces. I know, for instance, I think it's in London. We have the Africa Books Collective that is able to print. I'm not sure whether it's in London or some, that's able to print work that's been published in Tanzania. So if we had a printer in Somaliland, for instance, that can come to an agreement with a publisher in Kenya, then that becomes easier to have that kind of distribution. So it's really about increasing the network aspect of it and ensuring that there is, connection between what is being produced and what is being distributed and how that kind of distribution is able to happen.
think maybe we should probably ask Stephanie Kitchen to say something.
Yes,
We have a question online first. I don't want to take the time.
Okay, I'll do the one online and then we'll come to Stephanie. We have an email from someone in Tanzania asking what role do the public language institutions like BAKITA in Tanzania have in terms of ensuring that translations retain the originality of the source material? And are these institutions properly equipped for that role? Are you able to say anything about that, Munyao?
I think Ida might have a better response to that. But I could just say that these institutions are important in terms of laying down the structures and the rules that need to be followed. But while they establish what is standard in any language, I don't think it should be the rule. It should be a guide. They should be able to provide guidelines for people to work with, but not necessarily setting strict rules that must be followed, because people work, languages are not like this very, they're not set on stone, right? So I think there should be guidelines, but not really like the very strict rules that make it almost impossible for people to experiment, especially when we are working in fiction, and in that kind of material. Yeah, but maybe Ida could add to that.
Okay, I can quickly give an example from when I was translating Peponi. There are sections of the book when Abdulrazak is quite, uses language that might be seen by a Swahili audience as possibly difficult to digest, rather. So, for instance, when there's a character called Kalasinga who questions sort of like what happens in the Quran, or who sort of like says words about private parts, etc. And so when translating this, I was aware that BAKITA, which is the sort of like the institute that checks that the language is correct, etc., would have a look and sort of like possibly think this cannot be read by a secondary school student, for instance. So I was very aware of the language I was using when I was translating this. So that's one thing. The second thing I think is the whole issue of the standard. What is the standard? I mean, we do know that there were so many Swahili spoken, for instance, along the coast in 1930s, but then they chose the Zanzibar dialect largely for mercantile reasons, isn't it? But then you also had Imvita, Kipate, which had so much literature in it already, but it wasn't selected as the standard just because of commerce. And so these organizations are important, but sometimes they do act as gatekeepers to sort of like passing on whatever, how creators want to sort of like express themselves, if I can say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I work with the IAI. I'm also a director of the Books Collective.
Maybe we should come here.
No, it's on now.
Okay.
Just speak a bit louder. And so I work for the International African Institute that produces this journal, and I'm delighted that this is the first topic of our journal. It's clearly a very, very central topic in African studies and African cultural studies. I'm also a director of the African Books Collective, and I wanted to come back on some of the points you made about publishing, the kind of practical considerations, which are sort of front and centre, I think, always. I mean, I agree with you guys both about the almost outsized importance of prizes. So prizes of sponsoring literature, prizes of raising the profile of literature, that clearly hasn't changed. Gerner wins the Nobel Prize, Ida does the translation, it's wonderful coming together. I think I understand entirely why you're talking about philanthropy, about big orders and so on, but I think it's important that we think about the models that we've got, the publishing models that we've got to, if you like, to monetize the book or to create some kind of sustainable market for this literature, which is going on. I mean, and I think in some ways things are getting easier and easier. So ebooks are becoming more and more mainstream ebook collections in university libraries. African Books Collective can do that. All the big publishers doing that. Print on demand is there. So, the models are on your side, I think, publishing models in terms of developing this. And that also addresses questions of production and circulation that the speaker Somalia raised. I mean, my sense of some of the challenges that I'd be interested to hear what you think, Munyao and Ida, around things like licensing. So licensing, we need to think globally, we need to think locally. I love the idea of taking what we think of as kind of world literature, whether it's Ghana or Russian literature or Spanish literature, and then putting it into African languages. But you have to then negotiate with agents, with publishers for rights. So I don't know what experience you've had with that. I think that potentially is an area of kind of blockage, of difficulty. That's all I want.
Yeah, I wish Mkuki was here. He would be able to speak more about rights and publishing and how he tends to go about working with others in the production process of their books. But I do think it's always a challenge when it comes to allowing others to have access and to distribute your works or to publish your works. And these things tend to stand on the way, when you have to acquire rights and they are expensive, for instance, or people don't want to give you the rights to publish the work in elsewhere. And it becomes a lot of bureaucracy that might not work towards ensuring that, the works get to a wider audience. But then again, these are important things because you don't want to not go through the process and have people just randomly, having access to other people's copyrighted works. And at the end of the day, the people who are supposed to benefit from that do not. So when it comes also to publishing on the internet and having, ebooks and all that, there are many complexities that come with that. The ease with which, our books can also become available in PDF form, and they're just being distributed and people are reading it and the writer never ever gets a cent from their work. So there are all these complexities that I think, we all have to, think about and try to address. But I think, as I said, people who have better experience, like Mkuki and Nyota, might be able to, advise us more on that kind of, how to go about rights and that kind of work.
Sorry, actually one more thing. I agree with you about the complexities of e-publishing completely. I was also actually going to say, Munyao, I'm interested in your experiences in America. I think my sense is there's actually demand for African language material that's, you get on the call to librarians in New York and they don't think of this as marginal. They're talking about quite big and diverse communities. I mean, how many Yoruba speakers are there in North America? It doesn't mean they're all fight in Yoruba, but I think in future with formality and so on, there is also demand for African language materials, and it's important to stress that, to sort of balance the, philanthropy approach. I think it's for the continent, but it's also for the world.
I'm not sure I got that in its entirety, but I think you asked about the availability of works being more available outside of the continent.
Yeah, and in North America, where you're working.
Yeah, earlier, some years back, I was trying to find the works that have been published in Kikamba, which is my mother tongue. And in most of the places that I could find it available were in libraries in the UK and the US. And it became so difficult for me to actually have access to, to these materials. And I I've spoken about this before, how, the work that has been published in the past is very essential to grow in the work that we want to do now, because we have to, build on the literary traditions that have been there for a long time. And one of the easier ways that we can now be able to increase access to people on the continent is to find ways that some of this material can be made available on the internet. Right? If it's not possible to reproduce this, for example, if they're short stories, if it's not possible to reproduce the short stories in print form on the continent, are there ways that we can have, the rights to be able to publish these works on the internet, make it easier for people to read them? I think Kola in this journal that we are launching today speaks about some of the short stories he found in the British Library that have been published in Igbo, right? If those materials then can find a way to be made more available to on the internet, then it would be possible for people to have access to them. But also, publishers on the continent can also republish a lot of the materials that are existing out in the Western libraries and all the spaces, because these materials have not just been produced for people who want to write research on them, and probably they also have to depend on translators on the continent to access what these materials are about. Really, we have to find a way to make these materials available to people who are able to actually enjoy them, just as you would enjoy a novel, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Munyao and Ida. I think we've learned a lot, lots of important topics there. Thank you. So Terry Barringer, editor of the new journal, Africa Bibliography, Research and Documentation, will just say a few words now about the journal.
I promise it will only be a few words. But as you were talking just now about rich languages, I was meditating on the potential of the journal as a bridge journal, a very crowded bridge where academics and amateurs and publishers and perhaps the man on the Ibadan omnibus can debate issues that we've just been talking about and many more. I have been editor of ABRD's predecessor, ARD, for longer than I care to remember. I'd like to say a big thank you to all those who have contributed in the past. And I think quite a lot of them are present in this room or on screen. Thank you to those of you who are going to contribute to future issues. Please get in touch. Thank you to SCOLMA and the IAI, the parents of the new journal. And read it. Lucy will tell you how to subscribe. You can also access the whole past run of African research and documentation online now. There's some gems in the back issues. But read it, write for it, enjoy it. I enjoy editing it. And I am a third monoglot English woman who has only spent a few weeks on the continent of Africa.
Thank you for all your work, Terry.
That issue is completely accessible online, free, anywhere, for anyone. So,
Right, okay, that's wonderful. Yeah. And details on the SCOLMA website if you want to subscribe in the future. Just before we bring this to a close, I just wanted to mention a couple of items. On 23rd of June next year, SCOLMA will be holding its annual conference here at SOAS and also online. The title is Africa and the Environment, Archives and Data in the Climate Emergency. The call for papers is currently open until the end of January. So if you or anyone you know would be interested in presenting a paper on that topic, we do encourage you to submit your proposal. And we will be planning to publish some of those articles, some of those conference papers in the future in the new journal. The second item I wanted to mention is that SCOLMA is helping to get some African studies books to the Jagger Library in Cape Town to replace books that were destroyed in the fire there in 2021. We know there's some academics who have big collections of African studies books for which, you know, they're seeking a good home. So again, for people in person, we've got a piece of paper about what you can do. And again, look on the SCOLMA website for details if you're looking for a good home for your books. But finally, I'd like to thank everybody for attending this event. And particularly like to thank our online audience and the people who have submitted questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for quite all of them, but we very much appreciated those. And thank you also to the in-person audience here. And thank you in particular to Munyao joining us from California and to Ida here from SOAS. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye.